Just half a million people. Yeah.
Good morning, everybody, or good early afternoon to everybody on the southern side of the equator. We'll have Martin Anayi, CEO of United Rugby Championship, will be on very shortly. I recognise nearly every single name on the call, but just to remind everybody, the way to run through this is that just use the raise hand function when you want to ask a question, and then just pop your camera on when you're asking the question. Would be great. I see that we have a good split between north and south. So what we might just do is towards the end of the session, we might do that. Those questions can be embargoed, and at the start of the session will be sort of immediate use. So I'll flag that when we get to a certain point when we will embargo for tomorrow's editions. I think that will probably help a lot of the guys who are based up in the north. I think in South Africa we're very much in the immediate space of using content. So I'll just ask Martin to come on, and then I'll just ask a question or two to Martin just to get the ball rolling, and then if everyone wants to use the raise hand function, do try and keep it to about 2 questions, as we're quite busy today. And then if there's time at the end for follow-ups, we can certainly go around the table again. So morning, Martin.
Morning, Adam. Morning, everybody. Thank you for joining. Much appreciated.
So Martin, just to get things kicked off, I think just do you want to just kind of give everybody an idea of I suppose how URC has got on in season 2 and kind of where we're sitting from a sort of a business point of view?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's been a fantastic season 2, and you know, going into the semi-final, we're really pleased. You know, we've got some stellar cast of games this weekend with Leinster Munster at the Aviva Stadium, and then Stormers versus Connacht down in Cape Town, all selling really well actually. And you know, I think Stormers are looking to even beat their record from last week, around 44,000 came into Cape Town Stadium. Incredible atmosphere last week, and I know Leinster Munster is selling very well too. So it feels like we're in a really good spot. Our teams are playing superb rugby. If I look at the game statistics, Adam will know I'm sort of heavily on data, and then we try and track as many things as possible at URC across the board, and we try and use those data points to inform, you know, how well are we collectively doing. Pass that a lot of that back into the clubs as well, and those data points would suggest that the league is in pretty good health in terms of competition. For those that remember when we started this with URC, we were looking for good depth into the competition. We had that going into the quarterfinals. We had 2 away wins in the playoffs, which is pretty unusual. Munster turning over Glasgow, and then Connacht turning over Ulster. So we look at all of that. We take that into account. It's really meaningful that we get that. Lots of tries scored. I know that's not. It's a simple metric, but it shows, you know, again, to the uneducated that, you know, there's a good product on display. There's less of a margin between the teams now, which we obviously track to sort of show competition. We've obviously got one of the best, if not the best, club side in the world in Leinster, but we have a lot of teams pushing them, and I know that the Irish provincial scene is very strong, but we're seeing that re-emergence of Glasgow. We obviously know the South African team is very strong too, and we had a Benetton who just missed out on the playoffs on merit. So when I look at it, Adam, from a game point of view, I think we're in pretty good shape there. When I look at it from a fan perspective, I think we're in really good shape again. The key metric for us, and again, for those that have been on these calls before, you know, you would have heard me talk about this before, but the TV media audience, we had a record audience last year, around 34.6 million viewers across the year. We're tracking to that again. So again, to do that in season 2 is really really positive for us. And we could even surpass that. So it's really, really important for us to keep measuring those statistics. Social media, another really sort of immediate engagement metric of how well are fans engaging with our competition. There's more than ever doing that. We had 35% growth across the board in social media. We'll go through the 1 million follower mark, which is sort of a key metric for us. We're the fastest growing out of all the top leagues in the world on that front. So superb work that our team of content producers are doing for us. But we're also, engaging more people, and there's more engagement of those people more often. We track that. That's up 44% too. Our video views on YouTube, which again is a really key metric for us about a younger demographic following URC, that's up 135%. So we can see these metrics trending up. Our database is up over 20% as well, which is super important for us as a competition to serve that back to our clubs to show that the URC is working for them. The one metric which from last year we were a little bit underwhelmed by, this year not underwhelmed at all, is attendance. Attendance is actually up over 50%. Total attendance is up across the year. But the really important metric for us is on average attendance per game. That is up to around 32%. So we're hovering around that 9,500 average attended game. For those who have heard me talk about this before, that 10,000 mark is really where we're aiming for. We think we can get that over the next couple of seasons. So really, really pleasing, Adam, that we've got some of those key data points showing us that we're on the right trajectory. It's still very early days. We're in URC 2, we're in second season, lots to work on still. But I think, for the most part, it's been a really successful season so far, and we really can't wait for this run, and it's going to be absolutely superb.
Great stuff. If I could just ask anyone else to start asking questions, you can use the raise hand function, and I'll just tee Martin up for just one more. But yeah, if I could just ask everyone to start using the raise hand function for their questions. Martin, would you just like to explain a little bit maybe what's also going on behind the scenes? Obviously, we're well down the road in terms of CVC's investment across rugby, and I suppose the impact of that with Six Nations, URC and PRL, Premiership Rugby, how we're all working together there.
Yeah, good. I mean, actually, I'm talking to you all today out of a joint office that we have up in Victoria and London. That's a joint office with Six Nations Rugby and also Premiership Rugby. So that's again the sort of 3 CVC invested properties, and I think that just engenders a sense of use the word collaboration. We're looking at opportunities to work together. I sort of use the phrase the plumbing side, so the website, the app, the data systems, legal functions, finance functions, all those sorts of things that I guess to the outside world they don't necessarily see, that are replicated 3 or 4 times across the rugby ecosystem up here in Europe. We're trying to streamline those and make it cost effective. So that's sort of one tangible piece to the collaboration. Secondly, on a sort of more commercial note, is can we collaborate more often around what's good for the fan? So we look at this, say for example, internationally. Can we work together on media rights sales around the world? We did that with the top 14 and also UPCR in America. For those who know, we sort of did a bundled deal out there that returned good revenue back to our stakeholders, but also gave fans in the US one place to watch at least a lot of rugby, maybe not all of rugby, but a lot of rugby. We think that's a good initiative which we can follow with the partners here in this office more widely. There are lots and lots of pieces going into player safety. I think that's probably the key element for us where collaboration is being seen, is around the work that we're doing with instrumented mouth guards, with hit IQ, but also prevent and protect, the three sort of leading instrumented mouthguard providers in the world. And for those that don't know, that instrumented mouthguard, that's a World Rugby led initiative to try and measure from players both in training and in matches the impact levels, and therefore try and collate all that data to make the game safer. There's huge amount of work being done by World Rugby on that, and we're just an element of that. We're trying to, I guess, do our part and more, and a key part of the collaboration is to invest in those trials, and we're doing one of those trials right now with Hit IQ. 6 of our clubs are with them and collecting data as we speak, and that's with also the Scottish Rugby Union partnering with us on that. Other unions and other clubs within our ecosystem are working with the likes of Prevent and Protect, and again, we encourage that to try and ensure that as many players are using these instrumented mouthguards as possible to try and collect that data and make the game safer. We also collaborate very heavily and integrally with SANZAR as well. We had a session with them yesterday with Six Nations, SANZAR, and all the leagues, including the top 14, to try and work on some key issues around global season, but also the state of the game, which is a series of seminars that World Rugby have set up for everybody, which are hugely positive, to try and make the game more entertaining, but ultimately the key part is safer for the players, and that's to grow the game that we all love. So, I guess a huge amount of collaboration, not all commercial, not all sort of front and center, fan centric. There are those parts. We are doing those parts too, but the most crucial and critical part is around player safety and the game itself. Adam.
Great stuff. Thanks, Martin. I think we'll go first to Michael Glennon, and then followed by Jan de Koning and Stefan Thomas.
Hi, Martin. How are you doing? Sorry, it might be a bit loud here. Just a quick one. Do you have a start date for the next season's URC, or when will we know that?
Yeah, I believe it's the 22nd. I might be wrong on the exact date, but around the 22nd of October. And I think, if I'm right, that's around the semi-finals of the Rugby World Cup. We agreed to end the season earlier than we originally had planned by about 3 weeks, which is why this run-in is very, very tight. That wouldn't have usually been the case. We did that to make sure that the international players could get away. We agreed that with Premiership Rugby, who did the same thing as us, and then we agreed to then restart the competition, or sorry, start next season's competition towards the end of October.
Very good. Just when we saw years ago the Southern Kings, and then last year in England, a couple of clubs going into liquidation, and even London Irish a couple of weeks ago, concerns about payment. How far have you gone in your discussions with all the clubs in your competition in terms of getting a guarantee or deposits or something that, so you halfway through a season, you won't see a club getting into trouble?
Yeah, and that's a really good point. I'm passionate about. I want it to be a sustainable business at club level and international level. And we had some pretty well documented discussions and negotiations in Wales, which I'm glad they've come to a conclusion, and a positive conclusion. But actually underlying that is we as a league are union owned, and the unions of Scotland, Ireland, Wales, Italy, and South Africa effectively, the technical word is procure, but they govern the entry of that club in our competition. And if that club should get into financial difficulties, the union is there to step in and make sure that they are funded through. And that's a protection that we as URC have, and URC teams would have an EPCR too, as a level of protection there. And that's really just a function that our teams are not all privately owned, and they are owned actually in majority by the union themselves. So that's sort of an extra level of protection. It doesn't mean that they don't have financial concerns and issues, and COVID is still here with us, the financial impact, and they're trying to build back that. That's why that statistic about average attendance is so important, because we actually took hopefully the right decision overall, but to reduce the amount of games played overall, to not play against international weekends, to up the quantity, better for player welfare, etc. And I think this season has shown, 18 rounds, every game has really meant something. But the flip side to that is, it's taking a little bit longer for them to get back up to financially where they want to be, because they've got less games to sell. So I guess that's the yin and the yang of trying to do something that's right for player welfare and right to not play across the international weekends. At the same time, clubs thrive and survive off gate revenue. So that's why it's so pleasing to see that the average gate revenue is increasing, and we need to do more to drive central revenue back to them to make sure it's sustainable. But to answer your specific question, are unions effectively, the word is not a guarantee, actually, they procure the entry, so they're a bit of a buffer for us to make sure that clubs don't go bust.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Jan de Koning. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Martin. Nice chatting to you again.
Hi, Jan. Yeah. How are you?
Twofold. My question is twofold. The first one is more in addition to your stats, about the stats and the averages. Is it possible, I know maybe Adam can send it afterwards, but possible to get the top 5 games in terms of in-stadium attendances and the top 5 games in terms of television attendances to add to your averages statement?
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure Adam definitely has those, because I ask him for them all the time. So yeah, I'm sure he can send this to you.
Yeah, and we'll have, I can get you the attendances pretty quickly, and then we'll have the broadcast report will probably be made available at some point in June, and we'll do a full breakdown of top 5 overall, top 5 by territory, all that stuff that we did last year. So that'll be on the way.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Martin, I think then my second part of my question is, what would be your biggest challenge? I mean, obviously, the metrics are going up, but what would be your biggest challenge, or what area of the competition would be your biggest challenge going forward?
Yeah, I think travel's been well documented as being a challenge, and I'll give you some insight into why. Actually, when we put together the travel plan, which obviously you have to do to give a business case to the other participants in the competition to expand, the price of an average ticket was 35% less than it is today to South Africa. So that natural inflation has been quite difficult financially. The travel of our teams to South Africa are covered. When I say our teams, I'm going to stop using that phrase. The European teams down to South Africa have been covered centrally, and the teams going from South Africa up to Europe and back has been covered by SARU, by the South African Rugby Union. And the slight gaps in that are around travel policy and such like, and funding. So we tried to bring in, we did bring in Qatar Airways to help with that. That's worked to a certain degree, I would say, but there's a hell of a lot more we need to do there. And I think collectivizing that ticket acquisition, that purchase, is a really essential part going forward, and we can therefore bring the cost per ticket down. We can get better routes, better scheduling, and try and make that a lot more palatable journey. I'm conscious of that, and thank you for the question. That really is the one thing that we're working very, very hard on to try and improve for next season. The other thing we can help on that, actually, which is a material, but also needs sign off from the South African teams, which we feel like we have now, is to make each tour slightly longer to Europe, but therefore we only do 2 tours rather than 3 or 4 tours. So one, that is effectively a better position from a cost point of view, and therefore we can invest in that travel a bit more because we're spreading it over 2 trips rather than 4. So that's something we're looking at implementing for next season.
Thank you. I actually asked, I was going to do a follow-up question. You actually just answered it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Jan.
Thanks, Jan. Stefan, followed by William Davis.
Hi, Martin. How are you?
Hi, Stefan. Yeah, good. How are you?
Yeah, very well, thanks. Welsh Rugby's financial problems are well documented, as you know. I think next season the budget's going down to 5.2 million, and then it's expected to go down to 4.5. When you consider that, there's teams in Ireland who probably spend double that, are you concerned by the potential for the Welsh teams to be cut adrift a bit and not be as competitive? Because obviously you want the URC to be the best product possible, don't you?
Yeah, I do, and I think so. We're really pleased that Malcolm and Nigel Walker, Malcolm Wall, who's the chair of the Pro Game board, and Nigel Walker, as you know, for those that don't know, is interim CEO at the Welsh Rugby Union. So we're having a meeting with them next week. They're going to give us a lot more detail about actually how is this going to work and the plan. Spoke to Ian Evans, who's the chair. And I think they see it as an opportunity to bring through the next generation of players in Wales. I feel like we've got a very strong generation to come through, and they need the opportunity to play. To be honest, personally, I like that. I think it's a good opportunity to do that post World Cup. I think in terms of the comparison to the Irish, I use this a lot because actually a lot of the cost in the Irish system, to be honest, we don't have oversight over how much they spend, but just looking at their squad makeup is to retain Irish talent in Ireland rather than bringing in foreign imports, which cost a lot of money. They do that, but they do that very selectively, maybe 3 a season, and they do that really well. I think in Wales, the opportunity is to do that, is to invest in Welsh players in Wales and keep them in Wales. And I think, again, I guess we'll find out a lot more next week with Nigel and Malcolm. But I think that's their strategy in Wales, and I think it's for someone who's not Welsh but been in Wales a lot. It is still a very passionate fan base. We need to focus back on that and reconnect to it. And I think with the likes of Cardiff going to Cardiff Rugby, and I know that the Dragons are looking at that again to reconnect with Newport and reconnect with the roots. I'm really excited. I mean, they were world number one as a team. They're Grand Slam champions. Scarlets were very, very close, to be honest, to getting through to a Challenge Cup final and playing some really good rugby. So I think there are there's some hope. There's some reason to be hopeful there in Wales, I believe. What we as a league would love to see is at least 1 or 2 of those teams come really and do what Glasgow have done this year and challenge at the very top end of the competition. And I really do believe that is possible, even in the short run. I do think that, because you've got the talent in Wales to retain them for the next 2 years and to build off that basis. It will be challenging because, as you say, they will reduce the fees, the cost base down. But I think they have to do that to ensure that they can become sustainable and go on and grow again.
Yeah, there's always debate in Wales about a number of teams. There's even rumours that one team could go and be replaced by Ealing or merge with Ealing. Have you had any discussions like that with Welsh Rugby Union, and is there any chance that an English club, a London-based club, whether it's Ealing or somebody else, could come into the URC in the future?
Look, I think all of those issues around how many clubs, they made a decision to stick with 4, and the cost base is because they want 4. I think if they had 3, the cost base per team would be higher, obviously. So I think they made a bold and a good call to stick at 4. It's good for them, and I think that therefore it should be good for us. We do have an amazing fan base in Wales. There's a lot of work for us to do with URC and EPCR, quite honestly, in Wales. EPCR is my other hat. I'm board member and shareholder of EPCR. And there's some work to do there. You know, we do need to re-engage with the rugby audience at club level in Wales. And I think maybe that regional distinction was something that was challenging people, either club people or international people, and the region was sort of somewhere in the middle. So I think re-engaging as clubs, because I see all of the work. It's incredible. It's incredible. You look at it and you would never think there was any issues whatsoever in Wales. But for some reason, that's not quite translated into fans coming back, because all those attendances I was giving you, actually in Wales, they're a little bit softer than that. But success goes a long way in Wales, and we saw that when Scarlets had winning season in the Pro 12 last year, the Pro 12. That season, the season after, were record attendances. So, you know, I think a bit of success in Wales will go a very long way. And I was down watching Scarlets versus Glasgow, you know, at a really, really busy, I wouldn't say it was an absolute sellout, but it was really, really busy Parky Scarlets. And there was loads of people and buzz around Llanelli, and it was amazing. And just to hear Welsh club fans singing the way that they sing at the Principality in Parky Scarlets, you know, I don't think you can beat that on a sunny afternoon in South West Wales.
Thank you very much.
Right, William.
Hi, Martin. Good
Hey,
morning.
William, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Just go back to this never-ending discussion about the global season. Where do you think that is at the moment? Because it has major concerns here in Ireland if we move into summer rugby, because we're up against Gaelic sport, and that's a media concern. But I'm just wondering, because it dies off and then it comes back, and at the moment it's died off, I think, World Cup year. But where do you see it? You're involved.
Yeah, I think the idea that there'll be summer rugby in Ireland, that won't happen. I don't foresee that happening. I think the very latest conversations that we had yesterday with Sanzar and with Six Nations Rugby is to try and formulate you know, a plan where they can get a really competitive, a competition, which currently is the Autumn Internationals, into a kind of more formalised competition with the Southern Hemisphere. I don't foresee a really radical change to the global season, if I'm honest. You know, it kind of is the way it is because to a certain extent, you know, I don't think there's a huge desire to change the season from a winter one in the north to a summer one, for example. And I know that there isn't a desire in the Southern Hemisphere, certainly New Zealand and Australia, to change their season around either. So I think we're sort of just trying to tweak and tidy up the edges, if I'm honest, around the global season.
Okay, let's start this season. So with your EPCR hat on for a second, would you feel that almost guarantees it'll be the same format for EPCR next season, i.e. the somewhat complicated pool situation where not everybody plays the same teams, but is that a potential to change the following season if you get started earlier?
So for next season, there will be, we hope, a kind of a move back to pools. There will still be 24 teams, but the pools will give us because if you remember that at the moment there's 2 conferences. We'll move away from that for next season, I believe, and we'll go to to pools. And I believe, again, what we're pushing for is, you know, playing everybody in your pool, home or away, other than the team from your competition. We retain that. That is a sort of transitionary period because it's the last year of the TV deal. But I think that's favoured by our broadcasters to return to the pool, with a view that maybe in the following season we do, you know, a more radical change, or maybe not radical is not the right word, but a more comprehensive change where we focus again on pools. Whether you can go to 9 weekends or 8 weekends, that's the sort of ongoing conversation at the moment. There's sort of a general feeling within the Premiership and certainly from the URC that 9 weekend format worked pretty well. But I think in France we might have some issues with getting the 9th weekend, and so actually let's focus in on how do we maximise a better structure out of 8 weekends is where we're focusing in on. But those conversations are very live, and there's a lot of work being done right now with all stakeholders, including unions, who we had a meeting with yesterday, what we call the General Assembly of EPCR, and all the clubs feeding into that. And we've got 2 or 3 sporting committees coming up where we'll go into the detail of what people would like to see. One thing we know is our teams really do like the Challenge Cup as well, and so see the benefit of that. And there are some key themes that our clubs would like to see going forward, and I'm doing it on their behest. So we're pushing that along to try and get something that is a better product going forward.
Lovely, thank you.
Thanks, William. Just going to take Gareth Griffiths, followed by Stephen Nell, and I think that's where we'll probably cut off for immediate use and then move into embargoed. So over to you, Gareth.
Thank you, Adam. How are you, Martin? How are you?
Yeah, good. Gareth, how
Good,
are
mate.
you?
This was going to be my second question, but it'll tie it into the last question. Have you decided yet for next season about the about what you're going to do for the top 8, the 8 Champions Cup places? Because obviously at the moment it's Shield winners and the winners and things like that. Are you going to go to a top 8 meritocracy?
Yeah, I think that's most likely, Gareth, because for those that don't know, the way that it works now is we take the top 4 from the shields, so geographical shields, and then we took the next 4 from the highest placed teams in the league. And of course, we do that, or we did do that, because we wanted a sort of broad range of teams in the Champions Cup. We also said, though, and there was quite vocal objection to that within some of our stakeholder groups, that they didn't want that. But they said they'd go with that for a 2-year period and then review. So we'll review this summer, but unless it's unanimous to continue as we are, we will end up. Someone bring a charger here. Realise I didn't plug my laptop in. If it wasn't unanimous to continue as it is, we would revert back to a straight meritocracy. So long story short, long way of saying it, I think it's highly likely that we will revert back to a straight meritocracy.
You touched on it before. How important for you is it a competition that there's been no Welsh side in the top 8 playoffs for the last 2 seasons, that one of those teams do get in that? And you talk about attendances, to get a Welsh side at least in the playoffs at the end of the season to ensure that they're competitive along with the Irish, Scots and South Africans.
Yeah, it's a really good point, and we did have a little bit of an anomaly this year, as you know, because Cardiff got through on that basis as a Shield winner. But actually, I think Adam might correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think they had the same amount of wins actually, or as the 8th place team, and that shows you how competitive it was. Adam, maybe I'm wrong with that, but
spot on. It was the same last year between Glasgow and Osprey, same amount of wins.
So I think that shows you sort of how competitive it is around that playoff spot. The importance actually also, when you don't have relegation in the league, of EPCR qualification, because everybody's pushing per game right down into teams 11 through to 7 are really trying to either stay in or get into that spot. And to answer your question, how important is it? Yes, very important. And therefore, I think that will be good for the league, because it means that Cardiff and Scarlets and Dragons and Ospreys have got to push every single game. And that gives us the jeopardy that we need in the league to be a great league. So, but I'm kind of hoping that they do get in, because it's a lesser competition when you don't have that breadth of teams from across the British Isles, certainly.
Thanks, Gareth. Stephen, and then anyone who'd like to ask questions for embargoed content for tomorrow's editions, if you want to use the raise hand function to follow up after Stephen.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it. Martin, I just want to check, firstly, with media and broadcast rights going forward, could we get to a situation, for example, in South Africa, the only way of watching the games is via subscription, which is sort of out of the reach of most South Africans. Could we get to a situation where South Africans might be able to go on demand for games, pay X amount to watch online? We talk about broadcast audiences. I'm sure that would make have a huge effect. Or is that not practically possible, given the rights issues and so on?
So we have a very long-term deal with SuperSport, and got a very good relationship with SuperSport. Actually, I think it is a template for how partnerships should be. It's a proper partnership. They're helping us grow URC and EPCR in South Africa, and that costs money for them, because obviously paying rights fees, but also marketing and promoting. So I think it's not on our agenda unless it's on their agenda. If I'm being honest and transparent, so I always try and be. The reality is that we've got a relationship with SuperSport, and whether they choose to stream in the future rather than sort of the traditional subscription pay TV provider which they are today, it's got to be in their roadmap, and we would work with them on that, because we stream in lots of different territories. As an example, we actually in Ireland with RTE, our partner, our free-to-air partner, also created a streaming platform, URC TV, as a joint venture with them, which is doing really well for us globally in markets where we either have chosen to have part of our rights on linear TV and then part of it on URC TV, or chosen just to go to URC TV, and it's been a tremendous success. And thankfully, actually, the team were awarded Best Streaming Platform for URC TV the other day at the Sports Industry Awards here in London. So, I think it's a great space for a rights holder to be in, to be a streaming platform. But I think doing it with a broadcaster is even more important, because they've got the know-how to do it well.
Great. And then secondly, just on the travel aspect, earlier, what you mentioned was very interesting. I'm just trying to maybe color in some detail what you mentioned, less travel overseas, the tours and so on. Are we looking at potential format changes or chartering flights, or what how would you go about that? If I just look at, you mentioned the Qatar deal, as it's well documented, that the South African teams sometimes arrive on Wednesdays and have a nightmare flight via Doha quite often. So how would you kind of do that address the travel issue, and then also from a funding perspective, with South Africa not being a full shareholder, is there potential support for them in that regard?
Yeah, so there won't be any format change. The format is settled, and we think is a good format where everybody plays each other at least once, home or away, and then you play your geographical teams home and away. So I think that's a nice simple format for us. So the less flights would be just adding another match to the tour, and so that's why we're engaging with the players in South Africa and the Players Association and the clubs, and they quite like that, actually, because it's a 4-match tour, and they can kind of settle into locations and be a bit more sort of integrated into into the hotel, etc., where they're staying in the training facility. So I think they quite like that. The charter point is really interesting. That is something that we're talking to Qatar about, who have a very large charter aircraft facility, and that would then solve quite a lot of the issues around, as you say, long layovers or indirect flights via. to try and make it more direct and at more convenient times, and then try and expand the amount of business class seats that are available, because quite often it's not necessarily just cost around business class, it's actually capacity. There's a very low amount of business class seats available on those routes. They sort of oversubscribed business class, and then not a lot of flights back on after COVID. So as the airlines start to up that capacity, it will necessarily get easier. But we're also looking at that charter route by aggregating a lot of the ticket purchase to then do a better deal with an airline to get those flights.
Great, thank you very much.
I didn't answer your point about shareholdership, did I? Was that?
Yeah, it was just about the possible support for South Africa in terms of, I know in the latest financials in terms of European participation, it cost them 330 million rand. So it's obviously putting pressure on them from a financial point of view. Obviously, they have to pay a participation fee in the tournament because they're not shareholders. Is there a possibility of financial support for them with regards to travel, or do you think what you're doing there will necessarily result in a better scenario for them?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. I think because obviously there's a period of time, which is 2 more seasons, where they are guarantors. I would say actually the deal is that Saru does the deal with SuperSport and with sponsors in South Africa and pays a guarantee into the competition, and they are net beneficiaries of that, i.e. they're getting more money from broadcasters and sponsors than they pay in. But you're right, in terms of what they're doing is they're effectively buying a shareholding in the entity that our unions own and that CBC own part of. So there's a cost element to that, and they're happy with that. The travel part, what we try to do is introduce and do the deal with them on Qatar Airways. But secondly is this aggregation piece, which is if we aggregate all of our purchases of tickets across the league, plus South Africa, then they get a very real benefit of cost reduction and better routes. So that's sort of our that's the working initiative now.
Cheers, I really appreciate it. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, so just we'll move into the just embargoed section of Martin's time just for tomorrow's edition. So I know we have a couple of people from Scotland and Ireland on the call who probably prefer to work to that. So if you want to just use the raise hand function, we'll get the questions in. So I see David is first up, followed by Rory Keane.
Martin,
Hi, David.
conscious we've been talking for nearly 3/4 of an hour, and as you know, the print industry is dying, so there may not be enough space. I'll keep it very brief. I'm just wondering, because it's always a kind of a cartoon debate every year around this time. Have you decided a venue for next season yet? Because as you know, the uninitiated, as you might call them, who are a very large group, but sometimes not always initiated, kind of get into a cacophony of a fluster when a team that's very successful ends up having the same venue sometimes. But I'm just wondering what your thoughts next year. Have you decided on venue, or what's the plan there? Thanks.
For the final, or for the URC final or EPCR final?
No, URC, yeah.
URC. So actually, we chose on URC, and I think this is great credit to the South African team. To be honest, thank goodness we did do this. But we moved away from the destination final when the South African teams came in, largely because obviously you could have, sort of 2 South African teams in a European destination final, and that might be tricky. Which in year 1, obviously, we had with Stormers versus Bulls. So we read the tea leaves a wee bit on that the league is going to be more competitive, and it'd be harder to judge where successful teams will be. So we've moved away to a highest ranked team route, and that's why this weekend is really interesting, because you could either, if Leinster win, then they've got a final at the Aviva Stadium. If Munster win and Stormers win, then they're down in Cape Town. So that's why we've gone that route, and that is really, really tricky for us. But actually, this year there's an extra gap of a week because of the Champions Cup final in Dublin. So we have a bit more time to sort of put it on logistically than we did last year, which was 5 days to turn around. And so I think good for Jeopardy, bad for heart and operations and logistics. But I think overall we take Jeopardy over that, and a kind of full stadium, which is a kind of what you want to see in the final, right? For EPCR, next year will be in Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, and I think that's been said. One thing I would say about EPCR, which they've done a tremendous job on, that we've got, I think we're hosting around 30 different cities in Dublin of people who won a final of the Champions Cup and Challenge Cup from 25, 26 onwards. So I think that's, we'll focus on that. I think the destination final works really well for that repeat buying in EPCR. For us, where you're kind of not guaranteed the teams in a location, I think the home final route is the way to go, and what we should stick on.
And probably, again, this is more pointing towards my uninitiated readership base, the thorny issue, and it's probably relevant to the Welsh discussions about what's happening there. Lesser so possibly Italy, notwithstanding Benetton's Rainbow Cup win. But the thorny issue of a salary cap, it's always mentioned. I mean, you've seen it in EPCR when, again, successful teams beat lesser successful teams, and there's a hue and cry. If you maybe just kind of reiterate for the public the impossibility or the impracticality of imposing a salary cap in what is effectively a union-run competition.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I think it's union-owned, and so if you own a club as a union, you're investing in that for not to make money. You're investing in it to generate a successful team. If we're talking about Leinster there, for example, for the 12 counties of Leinster, for Irish rugby, and ultimately, that benefits us having successful teams coming from Ireland. A lot of that spend is to keep domestic talent in the country, and the price inflation that they're having to deal with is because of Japan or because of France offering a lot more money that maybe we could, if we didn't have unions supporting each team, that they could afford. So I can kind of, you can see the benefit of why they're doing it, and absolutely the rationale to not really accept a salary cap, because actually they're investing in these teams to generate a successful Ireland team, for example, in that as well. However, I can also see it from the other way around. I think in a European competition, there might be another way of doing it where you register a certain amount of players, for example, and only those players can play, in which case you've got to play within the scope of that. But I think it is very difficult, and I liken it a little bit to if your readership follows Formula One, around the resource restriction agreement, which has for many years Formula One has been trying to find a way of having effectively a budget cap in Formula One. But if you're Mercedes and you're investing in your engine, not just for the Formula One team, but also for the wider Mercedes automotive business, how do you know how much of that spend is F1 and not F1? And I think we've got a slightly similar case here, haven't we? How much of that spend is to ensure that the best Irish players stay in Ireland so that they play for Ireland?
And you just tickled my fancy briefly. I'll finish now. That you just mentioned the registering of players, and I was thinking about that earlier actually in a walk. That you might remember, and again, you can't do this overnight, but you might remember back in the kind of 90s, I think, early part of this century, in Europe, remember there was the kind of the restriction of either it was a restriction of foreign players, or there had to be a certain amount of home-based players in the European squad. It was separate to the domestic competition as such. Again, is that something that could be thrown up in the air, or has it been thrown up in the air?
No, actually, no, it hasn't been thrown up in the air. What has been thrown up in the air was around through COVID, both URC and EPCR removed any number of players that you could register effectively because of COVID. There were so many people coming in and out. This is slightly ridiculous. We'll open that up. Whether you need to go back to that and start to register a certain amount of players and keep that registration, pretty locked down unless there's bona fide injuries, obviously. That's something that actually has been brought up at EPCR and one that obviously URC should consider as well. But to a certain degree, though, that's like the stick, isn't it? So you have to use these amount of players. The reality for someone like Leinster, they went down to South Africa. There's such a strong squad. But they won one, okay, they lost one, the second one, pretty badly. But I think it's incumbent on the other teams to make sure that everybody's honest with their squad and playing as best a squad as possible. And I'd say that part of it is the bit that drives me, because then I've got a really competitive league. If people are having to play a certain amount of players, but then having to find another competition where another cohort of players have to play, then it sort of creates a problem elsewhere, I think.
Sure thing. Thanks, Martin. Cheers.
Yeah.
So Rory Keane, and just a final reminder to anybody else looking to get some commentary for tomorrow's editions. If you use the raise hand function, I'll call you out.
Nice one. Hi, Martin. How are you doing?
Hey, Rory. Yeah, good. How are you?
Yeah, I'll just be quick. Just had a query. I remember we were speaking to you last year, around April last year, and you said that the organisation had been discussing the possibility of launching a women's URC. Now, I was just curious if there'd been any advancement in that, and I know it's not as simple as there's lots of different challenges there replicating the men's model, but I'm just curious if that had maybe advanced in any way. Or
so the work, yeah, thanks, Rory. I think that's key initiative internally for us, and we've got over 50% of our workforce are women, and very, very keen as we are to, as I am, to see a women's competition of some description. There has been a competition which the unions ran through the Six Nations. The Celtic unions ran that. We were asked to sort of have a watching brief of that and feedback if there's anything that we could add, etc. So we're starting to do that. I've actually got a few of our team working on a case study and a business case for women's for a women's competition. What are the different options? We're really keen on talking to the Premier 15s and learning a lot of lessons that they're learning through the process that the RFU have run with that. We want that to be really integrated at union level and at World Rugby level. So lots and lots of conversations are ongoing. The desire is absolutely there. Our clubs are starting to vote with their feet, and the Vodacom Bulls have launched a women's team in South Africa. I think is that the first. Those South Africans on the call might tell me otherwise, but it's certainly a high-profile launch in South Africa. Not sure if it's the first. Someone might correct me if I'm wrong there. And then it always, I think there comes a point where you have to kind of piece this all together and say, right, this is what we're going to do. At EPCR, then put my other hat on, really keen to see an EPCR women's competition of some description as well, because it's very important that we've got that on the agenda also there. So trying to talk to our French colleagues, say already talking to the Premier 15s. There might even be an opportunity, for example, to have the Premier 15s to come and share some office space here in London with us. So that's sort of our thinking, is to try and create sort of the glue And then from those conversations, we try and come up with something which is sustainable, which is exciting, which is cool. And we're doing a lot of learning at the moment, and it's, I think the Women's Six Nations, for example, is going great guns. We're learning a lot from them, a lot with the TikTok guys that have done with that. But there's an absolutely got to be a competition in there somewhere. We just want to make sure that it's as good and sustainable as possible.
Very good. And just lastly, I was just wondering about, there's been a bit of chat last year, as you talked there about, exploring new markets and taking things abroad. There's been a bit of chat before about potentially taking a game to the States. There was rumours before about, an interpro between Munster and Leinster in Boston or something like that. Is that something workable down the line, or something that would interest you?
Yeah, I think out of all of the leagues, I think we've got the most resonance in the States. We actually generate the most amount of money from the TV deal in the States than any of the other leagues. So I think it shows that certainly an Irish element of the audience is significant in the United States, and they would absolutely support our teams going over there and playing. We have been in discussions with people in Boston. We can't find the right date, and that sounds really silly, but it's about getting the timing right with the venue. You've got Major League Baseball, over certain parts of the season. So it's about getting the right date and making sure that our clubs here really want to do that. Taking it into pro, though, as you know, a Leinster Munster or Munster Leinster is a whole different kettle of fish, isn't it? Because one of the key reasons why somebody puts the money that they do hard, earn money into a season ticket because they want to go and see a game at Thomond Park or at the Aviva Stadium. So I think it'd be hard to take a Leinster Munster or Munster Leinster, but there might be other combinations that could work out there. But we haven't found the right solution yet, so we don't want to do it without it being right for everybody.
Great stuff. Thanks very much.
Okay.
Thanks, Rory. Simon Lewis.
Thanks, Adam. Hi, Martin.
Hi, Simon. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. You may remember at the start of the season there was a bit of a kerfuffle in Ireland anyway around an emerging island tour, and your suggestion was a Nextgen competition for the URC. I just wondered if that's any plans for that are advanced to give that kind of tier of player more game time.
Yeah, good question. Actually, the management of URC are really keen to see a cup competition played during the Rugby World Cup. I would say that the response to that was a bit patchy from our clubs. We couldn't get what we thought was the right group. We want everybody to be involved in that rather than a few. So we couldn't get consensus on that, and I think that might be around costs, quite honestly, with some of the teams. So it perhaps is more about wrong timing rather than the idea itself. I think what we're seeing now, and certainly with how close the games are getting, I'll take Leinster to one side for a second, but everybody else, I think that crop of players that were getting sort of 4 or 5 games a season aren't getting that in the URC anymore. And hence why actually I still think it's a good idea. It was probably just wrong timing to try and launch it during the Rugby World Cup, but we'll give it another go at the right time. And I think probably just need a bit more of a commercial angle to that to support it. So I think we need to go and get it on TV and sponsored and so on to make it a bit more commercially viable for everybody. But I know that the desire from a playing point of view and a high performance point of view is there. And that's usually a good place to start. So I think it was more about timing why we didn't get it off the ground for Rugby World Cup, but we'll keep trying.
Okay, just one more on that. Those 4 or 5 games that a lot of those players were getting came during international windows, of course. Is there any thought about returning to that? And I wonder what your views are on those lulls in the season for the URC.
Yeah, I think from a competition point of view, if you don't take into account media and everything else. I think from a competition point of view, it's strengthened the competition, not playing across those weekends, because we've got better refereeing, better match officiating, TMOs, etc. We've got obviously better players playing. But you're right, there are big gaps in the season. I don't think actually that anyone minded the gap in November, because it's such a hard burst of energy to start with. So actually that was really welcomed, certainly by the players and the coaches. I think from a business point of view, they miss a little bit of the gate revenue, I think, and so I think speaking to our CEO group, and that's sort of all the club CEOs, they'd probably like to see 1 or 2 more home games a season from a budgetary point of view, not necessarily a playing point of view. We're just, I think that's part of it. I think we'd like to see a cup competition could fill the void of both of those two things without jeopardising, I think, what we've got going at URC, which is a really, it's young, as I say, but it's getting better and better by the day almost. Oh, you're on mute now.
Sorry, thanks very much.
Yeah, no problem.
Super. Thanks, Simon. Okay, I think, guys, we've run over by 5 minutes, so I think we'll just call it a day there. Just again, thank you to everybody for putting in the time. This has probably gone a little longer than usual, and we'll have the recordings and everything available afterwards. Is there, Dave, Michael, are there any follow-ups there?
Oh, thanks lads for your time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Cheers.
Thanks, Martin. Thanks, Adam. Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.